Since the game's release, World of Warcraft has had a few bosses that were extremely demanding in terms of gear, player skill and teamwork. It's not uncommon for some boss encounters to take hundreds of attempts before any group managed to defeat them. Some have even been argued to be impossible to kill by the player base. The most well known of these is Cthulhu, which on its release in Vanilla WoW was argued to be mathematically impossible to beat, even with all players playing perfectly. While the question of whether Cthulhu was actually impossible to beat is an interesting one to discuss, this video will instead focus on another raid encounter from the original vanilla version of the game. This is the story of the first and only raid encounter that went undefeated all throughout its expansion. Interestingly, this raid boss could be found in the easiest raid of Vanilla WoW, Zul'Gurub, which was situated in the jungle of Stranglethorn Vale. This raid instance played out as you see on the map to the right, with 6 bosses as well as 4 additional optional bosses that raid groups could choose to kill. What a lot of people don't know is that strictly speaking, Zul'Gurub only had a single boss that wasn't optional, the final boss named Hakar the Soulflayer. The way it worked was that the other 5 main bosses would give Hakar an extra ability if they were still alive when the raid group attempted to take down Hakar. While the intended purpose of this interaction was to make Hakar stand in the middle of the raid without players being able to skip the other bosses and go straight to Hakar, Blizzard had actually inadvertently made an early version of what would later be known as a Hardmode boss, something that would be fully embraced with the fan favorite Ulduar raid in the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. Unlike later Hardmodes, which were designed to be very difficult to overcome, Hakar with all 5 priests alive was in no way meant for players to be able to beat, but should instead deter players from skipping the other 5 main bosses. This approach worked, as Hakar with 5 remaining priests became the first and only boss to never be killed during its entire expansion. Although extremely hard bosses were introduced in later expansions, no raid boss would ever outlive its expansion again. Hakar, as well as the rest of the raid, was removed from the game in the patch that prepared the game for the Cataclysm expansion in 2010. In order to understand what made Hakar with 5 priests so difficult, we must first look at the abilities he would gain from each of the 5 remaining priests. Firstly, he would gain an AoE silence which dealt 1500 damage and lasted for 8 seconds. Secondly, he would gain a stacking AoE poison effect which dealt 300 damage every 2 seconds per stack. The third spell he would gain was a stun which he would only use on the tank, which dropped the threat to 0, effectively making them unable to tank for the remainder of the encounter. The fourth spell that he would gain access to was a gouge which lasted 2 seconds and removed all threat. This ability would also only be used on the tank. The last spell he would get was a 150% increase to his attack speed, which lasted for 8 seconds. As you can imagine, these 5 spells would put unsustainable pressure on the group. This is because aggro would be running wild, healers would be hit by 8-second silences, the whole raid would take high AoE damage, while the boss would attack at more than double his normal speed on a target which most likely wasn't even the tank. This all happened in addition to the normal raid mechanics, which makes it understandable that no raid group ever managed to defeat this encounter during the original Vanilla WoW. The story originally ended here, but with the launch of Classic World of Warcraft in 2019, a version of the game which was based on the final patch of Vanilla WoW, players could once again have the chance to take down Hakar with all 5 priests remaining. While the setting was similar, the way players now played the game was unlike anything ever seen 14 years prior. Players would now go to extreme lengths to boost their character's performance, as well as using any group composition needed to overcome raid mechanics. As a result, the previously undefeated and thought to be impossible boss would fall for the first time to the guild Blade of Kill in April of 2020. The kill was very fast, as it took only a minute and 21 seconds. This was necessary, as the spell Blood Siphon, which Hakar always cast 90 seconds after being engaged, would have caused a raid wipe. Almost 15 years after being introduced to the game, the hard mode of Hakar would finally be defeated in just under 1.5 minutes. Around 8 minutes after the raid entered the zone. I hope you learned something new and that you liked the video, and thank you for watching.